Well, good morning, Facebook. I want to welcome you to the September 19th edition of Conversations. This is our second conversation we're having. I'm going to build on what we talked about yesterday and this idea of how to have a casual conversation with each other, even a friendly debate that coming out of all the strife that has happened in our country and in my lifetime I can say I have clearly seen this. I have seen the buildup. Just in terms of ministry, I've been a pastor now 20 years. And just in those 20 years, I have seen the complete change that has happened in our culture, the division that we really see, not just between church and state, but the division between people. And yesterday we talked about how the assertion that I made was part of the struggle is when abortion was legalized 50 years ago, and this is not all abortion's fault, please understand that, okay? But one of the consequences coming out of legalized abortion was that we basically created different levels of life. We lost, and we're in the process as time went by of losing the concept of the sanctity of life. That the God being our divine creator, if we accept that as Christians, and remember, as Christians, we live in these two kingdoms, the kingdom of God, the kingdom of the world, and the colors. Remember, the colors don't matter there. It's not a uh, there's no reference to any political party in that. It's just two different colors, the two different kingdoms, the kingdom of the world, the kingdom of God. And as Christians, we live as citizens of both kingdoms. There's places where the citizenship intersects between and being a citizen of one impacts our citizenship in the other one and how we live as citizens in the other one. So as citizens of God's kingdom, um, that impacts how we also live as citizens, it should, of the world, of the worldly kingdom that we live in. So for instance, I live in the United States of America. The challenge is, okay, when we lose sight of the fact that God created all human life and he created us all the same. Yes, there's male and female in terms of um, our gender, if you will, our sex, but he created us with equality in the sense that we are all born with souls. That's what distinguishes us from everything else in his creation. All other life in his creation do not have souls. And even that statement there that I just made could be divisive, because there are those who believe in the exact opposite. Well, what I'm trying to get to today is this idea of us and them. And I'll use what I just said as an example of that. There is a belief today that if a person denies what is the commonly held belief from one direction or the other, that it creates, as a byproduct of our loss of the sanctity of life, an us versus them. And here's what I mean. When we can divide humanity into different groups, when we can say that one group, and this is, I'm talking we in our minds, okay? In our minds, when we start to say that our group, whatever group we identify with, whatever group we say we belong to, that when we can start a us versus them, our group becomes better. Our group becomes the true life. Our group becomes the only one worthy of life. We can justify in our minds getting rid of them. That's, in my opinion, what has caused such a strong reaction. And I had the same exact reaction a little over 2 months ago when in Minnesota we had these these lawmakers and their spouses. In the one case, murdered, in the other case, shot and wounded. Um, I had the same exact reaction then that I'm having now, mourning for our society, mourning because we have so created this idea of us versus them that we now are justifying to ourselves harm to the them. That's the danger, in my opinion, the danger of creating any types of divisions. As a kid, I'm Gen X. Okay, I'm towards the end of Gen X, and I really believe that my generation, and I'm not trying to talk about this division to have an us versus them. I'm just helping you understand my human experience. Okay, this is part of the conversation here because I want to learn about your human experience, and that's how we have conversations. But one of the unique things that I feel my generation had is we had the most innocent and fullest impact of the civil rights movement coming out of the 60s and 70s. When I was a kid, I didn't see race, I didn't see color. It was just these were kids in my class. I knew them by name. Even high school, college, I didn't look at somebody as where they were from or what color their skin was. It was simply that's Joe or that's Jack or that's Tu or that's Vang. That's Tony. Jamal, whoever. These were people I went to school with. These were people I worked with. I had an Anthony, or his real name was Antonio, but he called himself Antony. You know, he was third generation Hispanic, lived in Texas. His family had been, in the community that we moved into for three generations. He did karate, black belt at karate. Worked with him at a furniture store. I didn't look at him as Hispanic. I looked at him as Tony or Anthony, as he wanted to be called. And he would show me karate stuff when we would have downtime. I feel for me as a kid, we could just be people, be human beings. We weren't looking at, they're boys, they're girls, or they're this race or that race. It was just we were people and we wanted to do stuff together. We looked at it as we. Maybe the millennial generation experienced that in the early 90s, but then in the 2000s, one of the things that I started seeing happening was more and more push to create groups to segregate again, and that's what's interesting for me today. We those in the civil rights movement fought so hard to desegregate, to have no distinctions, to have no separations. And yet today, that seems to be everywhere. The very groups that were for the civil rights then and desegregation then, today seem to be all about segregating. And I think that's wrong. Why? Because it creates an us versus them dynamic instead of it just being we, that we're all in this together, that we're all the same, that we all have the same opportunities. I think that's another thing. As I look at the conversations and the dialogue that has happened around so many different movements, but the trans movement today as well. If I try walking in the shoes and the life of the average trans person, I see a lot of trans people who are afraid. They're afraid that the world is out against them. They have been convinced that they're going to be hurt or they are going to be ostracized. They're going to be mistreated. And they see that their ire gets up the second that somebody calls them by something that they don't want to be called. And so it's almost like creating a self-fulfilling prophecy that, one thing goes wrong and it just um, cascades from there, just domino effects from there, leading to some type of violence. Now, this can happen just as easily on the other side of the aisle. This can happen just as easily in different groups within conservatives or types of leaning people, where again they've been convinced that the world is out against them. And well, how do we stop that? How do we lessen this fear? Well, going back to what I talked about yesterday, we lower the hyperbole. We get rid of it. We don't need to talk about getting rid of people. We don't need to talk about, we don't need to be using language of, I would say, violent rhetoric, but even division. Let's talk about concepts. Let's talk about beliefs. Let's talk about policies. Let's talk about the direction that we feel would be best for our country. So, for instance, um, the concept of live and let live, and I get it. I'm a pastor. I believe Christ is the only way for salvation. But if somebody doesn't want to believe that, I'm not going to push that on them. We can still have conversations. If they want to ask me questions, they can. If I want to ask them questions, I can. But looking at them as a we, I want to treat them with the same respect that I would like in return. And then, so therefore, I treat them with that same respect that I would like in return. I treat us as we together, even though there are some differences. And so I'm interjecting that idea out there today. You know, how do we move? And this is for our personal lives. This is homework, if you will. Um, how can we as individuals in every situation we find ourselves change a situation that is a us versus them into a we? Well, my answer is I start with me. What am I doing in this situation that is making this person feel like they're different than me, that they're lower than me or higher than me for that matter? How can I hear them, take to heart what they're saying, treat them with the respect I would like to receive in return, at the same time, still be able to talk about my beliefs, my opinions, and we share these opinions with each other. Maybe we can find some common ground. I will guarantee you there's going to be a higher likelihood of finding common ground if I keep my language very even keel. If I don't start going into hyperbole and start making everything life and death and making everything end of times and making everything, judgment, if I make it, hey, let's just talk. Let's figure this out together. If I keep even my tone down, I notice this with my kids. If I come into a conversation and I've got my tone up, and I get it, my generation, our parents, they could blow off the handle, they could fly off the handle, they could smack us upside the head, and we just had to get over it. Okay, if we looked at them wrong, they took that as us talking back. That's not the way it's looked at today. And so, if we can control ourselves, if we can control how we react to things, if we keep an even kill, that I think will help other people be able to do the same in return. Just my 2 cents on a Friday. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.